We have breakthroughs to make, we have economies to take back, and we have new worlds of work to explore. So without any further delay, allow me to introduce our first guest speaker. He currently is a Minister of Economic Development for the Republic of South Africa, but he is also a proud union man. He led the trade union for textile and clothing in the Southern African, and he has been serving on the governing body of the ILO for decades. Ladies and gentlemen, please, let's reserve a warm UNI welcome to the Minister of Economic Development of the Republic of South Africa, our friend, Ebrahim Patel.
Mr. Joe de Bruin, President of UNI Global, Philip Jennings, General Secretary of UNI Global, Ahmed Kathrada, veteran in our struggle for freedom and former Robben Island prisoner, Guy Ryder, Director General of the International Labour Organization, the ILO, Sharon Burrow, General Secretary of the ITUC, Zwelinzima Vavi, General Secretary of the Congress of South African Trade Unions, COSATU, Bones Skulu, President of UNI Africa and General Secretary of SACAU, the South African Retail Union, Emma Mashinini, the founding leader of the retail union in South Africa that became part of COSATU. Brothers, sisters from the UNI family across the world, welcome to the African continent, birthplace of humanity and home to 1 billion people. Welcome to South Africa, the land which inspired a struggle across the world and which has trade unionism in the DNA of this nation. Welcome to Cape Town, a city of incredible beauty where 2 oceans meet and a mountain juts out near the edge of the water, where the colonial story started in my country, but also where the first struggle of resistance started. Welcome to the 4th UNI, World Indaba, of your organization, one of the world's largest global trade unions and Africa's largest union federation. Welcome to all of you at this very important conference and congress of UNI Global. Dear friends, a few days ago, we remembered the passing away of a giant among us, Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, a fighter for his people, an inspiration to the world, first president of the democratic South Africa. Nelson Mandela, who shaped the consciousness of a generation of activists across the world, whose life embodied a positive globalization, a globalization of social justice, of non-racialism, of solidarity. Nelson Mandela, who received the inaugural Decent Work Award from the International Labour Organization, in recognition that his fight for freedom was inseparable from the fight for the rights of workers, that freedom must embrace decent work and a living wage. Your Congress is held as South Africa celebrates 20 years of political freedom. 20 years since that day when millions of people, young and old, black and white, workers and unemployed, women and men, stood in long queues and defied the expectations of the pessimists to peacefully mark the end of white rule and the beginning of more than simply a new chapter in the life of a nation. It marked the birth of a nation. It is fitting that you meet here today, for the international trade union movement was a key pillar in the struggle against apartheid that helped to bring together our freedom. We as South Africans can never forget the work done by so many union activists and members over the decades to help us win our liberation. For years before 1994, we could count on the global trade union movement to support our cause through protests, through fundraising, through boycotts, disinvestments, and sanctions. I and many of my colleagues undertook anti-apartheid union-to-union visits to find out what life was like in societies without apartheid. In the darkest years, that solidarity was a steady light for our people. Comrades and friends, our democratic order is built in part on the recognition that workers' rights are central to human rights. Under apartheid, what job you could get, whether you could belong to a trade union, to bargain collectively and to strike, depended on the color of your skin. Behind the facade of race was a system of super exploitation in which many had to work hard so that a few could live well. It was a system built with islands of privilege in an ocean of poverty. At the same time, the labor movement in South Africa was at the core of the liberation struggle, an unparalleled center of power and solidarity. Many trade unionists were dismissed, went to prison, or died in defense of their right to join the organization of their choice and take part in its activities. The first step under democracy was the adoption of a constitution for the country where the rights of workers are entrenched in the Bill of Rights. Our constitution today guarantees the most basic rights: to organize, to bargain collectively, to enter union security arrangements, and to strike. These are rights which governments cannot tamper with. These rights came through the struggle of the workers, from the 1950s with the adoption of the Freedom Charter, to the 1980s in what we call the Workers' Charter Campaign, and the alliance of trade unions with the African National Congress, the party of Mandela. The first parliament passed a law in 1995 to require government to consult and engage in dialogue with social partners on labor laws and all major social and economic policies. We formed a statutory body, the National Economic Development and Labor Council, which we call NEDLAC, at which trade unions, business representatives, and community delegates engage government on fiscal policy, competition policy, youth policies, labor market matters, and international trade policies, among others. The labor laws themselves were negotiated line by line, word for word, comma for comma, with trade unions and with business representatives. To illustrate our journey and also the kind of man that Nelson Mandela was, I want to share with you just one anecdote. I recall in 1995, in the middle of the negotiations, I was in the trade union movement, and you know trade unionists, we were impatient with the pace of the negotiations. We wanted government to put more on the table when we were negotiating the Labor Relations Act. So as a pressure tactic, we decided we would organize a massive nationwide set of marches through all the major cities of the country. And we had hundreds of thousands of workers gathered in Cape Town, in Durban, in Johannesburg, in Pretoria, right across the nation, demanding that the new democratic government must ensure proper labor laws. So the march was against the negotiation stance of the democratic government. And so we asked the head of government, President Mandela, to receive the memorandum. His office made inquiry where exactly would the march start and where would it end. And to the surprise of the nation, on the morning of the march, he asked us if he could join the march. And in fact, he formed part of the last mile of the march to deliver a memorandum to his government to speed up talks on the rights of workers. Now, our Constitution specifically enshrines the right to organize and to strike. Our labor laws protect all of our workers, from nurses and educators to farm laborers and domestic workers, from shops and restaurants to mines and factories. It was a major victory for working people in South Africa. But the lesson of governance is that no laws or institutions are perfect. Remaking the institutions of state power and reorganizing the workplace requires more than passing of laws. We are still today laboring to transform embedded systems that lead to deeply inequitable pay, limited career mobility for many workers, and unfair, often discriminatory decision-making in the economy. Moreover, as you know, some in business are quick to change their policies to circumvent labor law. So we've updated our laws regularly. Some 15 years ago, we introduced a change to deal with what is called an independent contractor, to ensure that we don't have disguised employment relationships under the heading of independent contractors. More recently, in the last 12 months, our parliament passed a law to address the challenge of workers caught in subcontracted and temporary work arrangements. Labor rights are central to achieving a just society and a fair economy. But they cannot by themselves secure adequate conditions for working people. They need to be bolstered by the transformation of the economy and workplaces and by the organization of workers themselves. That is true in South Africa, it is true across the world. We inherited one of the most inequitable and oppressive societies in the world, where African communities faced a legacy of underinvestment in infrastructure, in education and healthcare. Less than half of the working people were employed, and a few huge companies dominated production. We have undertaken major initiatives to address these. Today, most households have electricity and running water, as well as access to basic education and healthcare. I briefly illustrate. In 1890, the first electricity was connected to a house here in the city of Cape Town. 1890. Between 1890 and the start of our democracy, 5 million homes were connected to the energy grid, 5 million. Between the start of democracy and today, substantially more than 7 million additional households were connected to the energy grid, meaning that in less than 20 years of democracy, we did better than 106 years of colonialism and apartheid. These gains have done much to reduce the deep inequalities left by apartheid. They have lifted millions of people out of poverty and moderated some of the effects of economic activity, as a recent World Bank study conceded, looking at the effect of social security in reducing inequalities. But we work now on transforming the economy itself. State investment in infrastructure and education, combined with a strong and active industrial policy, have become our main instruments for achieving a more equitable and job-rich economy. In the past 5 years, we've invested heavily in building the foundation of inclusive growth, investing in power plants, schools, railroads, clinics, dams, and solar parks. We've expanded the largest higher education program in our history, and we're now busy building Africa's largest green energy program. These investments have helped to counter the global slowdown since 2008, whilst laying the basis for inclusive growth in the long run. We're working to encourage new industries that can generate jobs and opportunities for all our people, to break with the pattern of an African continent that exports raw materials to the rest of the world and imports finished goods. But inclusive growth is not only about jobs and economic opportunities. It requires that our people, working people, have a strong voice in policy development. An equitable and coherent society must be built on participatory democracy, something which our Constitution recognizes. In this context, the labor movement has a central role to play. You in UNI, you in the ITUC, you give ordinary workers a way to influence governments, to ensure that the voice of the poor are heard beyond elections. Social dialogue has been entrenched in our economic and labor policies. In the past few years alone, we've reached locally social accords on skills development, youth employment, the green economy, local procurement, and challenges facing the mining industry. But we have still much to do and far to go to wipe out the legacy of more than 350 years of colonialism and apartheid. But I want to acknowledge too that in the 20 years of democracy, we have some actions that we are not proud of. I want to single out the lengthy delays in providing antiretrovirals to HIV-positive people who needed them, and the tragedy of Marikana, where a number of striking workers died. Democracies are not perfect, but they are self-corrective. We now have the world's largest antiretroviral program for people living with HIV/AIDS. We have a judicial commission of inquiry into the deaths at Marikana that may point to culpability, who is responsible, and also to ensuring policing policies that are compatible with the fundamental right to protest peacefully. Comrades and friends, we recognize that South Africa cannot develop in isolation. We have to deal with the new opportunities and risks from globalization. For workers in manufacturing, global competition has been a long-standing feature of their lives. Today, that challenge is increasingly affecting workers in services and retail. To avoid a race to the bottom, workers need organization, locally and globally. Organization that help workers to join together and deal strategically with these challenges. Your Indaba reminds us of the critical importance of worker solidarity for progress. We saw that solidarity in action not so long ago when Walmart, the world's biggest retailer, took over a leading local retailer in South Africa named Massmart. The South African government said to Walmart, "We will only approve this transaction if you respect the rights of workers to unionize, if you take back workers who were retrenched by the company that you're buying over, and if you source from local factories so that we build local economies." When Walmart refused, We had a 2-year battle through the Competition Commission, the Competition Tribunal, and the Competition Appeal Court, which resulted in a court order that compelled Walmart to reinstate hundreds of members of the UNI affiliate in South Africa and to set up a fund of 240 million rand to support local producers and small businesses. It shows that governments are not powerless in the face of globalization. Globalization requires governments to do new things in new ways, but we are not powerless. We have the responsibility to defend the rights of workers. I want to acknowledge the support given by UNI and SACAO in that landmark engagement with Walmart, to say that we are open for investment, but investment that respects our laws and the rights of the working person. Comrades and friends, while you are meeting in South Africa, you are reflecting on the problems of workers across the world. Can we imagine a world without trade unions? It would be a world without a break in the working week, without maternity leave for women, without restrictions on long hours of work, without fair wages, without safety and health at work. In other words, a world of the 19th century. It is organized labor that changed this for so many millions of workers. Yet today there are millions more workers without these protections in the 21st century. Your challenge and our challenge are pervasive. To deal with structural joblessness, of deep and in many cases rising inequality, of high levels of youth unemployment and high carbon emissions in our economies that constitute a threat and a danger to the next generation. It is of uneven development that sees Africa, this continent, de-industrializing and turned into a supplier of raw materials to the factories of the world, feeding the consumer habits of other continents, while poverty remains high here in the birthplace of humanity. Your traditions of solidarity must help to provide hope to those workers and to the people of the world. The international union movement needs to reflect and develop strategies to address the changing global economy and the new approaches by corporations. You are asked to reinvent trade union approaches in the 21st century while staying true to the principles of solidarity that is the founding basis of your movement. The profound questions raised by this Indaba around growing the union movement, around international coordination and inclusive growth are a powerful contribution to this process. Your agenda, in conclusion, is an important opportunity to come up with new ideas and approaches, as well as building solidarity and organizational strength. On that note, I am pleased to declare the conference officially opened, to welcome you to this beautiful city, to ask you to spend money on locally produced goods that were made under fair labor conditions, and to help build the solidarity of working people across the world. Thank you very much.